Recording. We're on. What up, people of YouTube? Belton here. I know that you guys are probably expecting a video on my thoughts on the changes that are upcoming. There have been quite a few of them, and I will be dropping that fairly soon. I do have a great deal of thoughts. Just need to put that all together. One of the things I'm doing right now, as the league comes to a close, I finished my 40 out of 40, and that was the last sort of solid accomplishment, our task I wanted to pursue, or goal, sorry, for the league. So now it's all about, making currency, kind of putting a nice little bow on things. And, for the last week of the league, I'm going to focus basically on generating long-term value with the currency I have, either making items that are not going to be possible anymore, getting things that are no longer going to be possible anymore, or in some cases, thinking about how can I, if I have 1,000 divines like raw in league right now, if I just log out or keep playing, those 1,000 divines will be at merger, there'll be 1,000 divines in standard. Whereas if I can arbitrage the two things, so buy something that has a higher price point on standard for a lower price point in league with those divines, and then convert them at the merger, basically magnify my money. So I actually thought this was kind of a fun process here, something you might guys find sort of interesting. One of the things that is changing is the much anticipated nerf to Heat Shiver, along with the removal of helmet enchants. So what I thought would be kind of fun here, and I just prepped this for a little bit, was to make a bunch of double influenced Heat Shiver helmets. So these will be legacy, because the 100% cold that is extra flyer will be going down to 30%. So by itself, it'll have a use case as a result of that, but they're fairly common. So the double influence adds another layer as well. They're going to be 30 quality, and you can see we added gilded fossils here, and then we'll go and enchant them at the end. Maybe get like a nice white +1 proj on it or something like that. So if we look at a helmet like this, these are going to have some serious long-term value, because it's the it's what is now legacy. The 100% cold is extra. It's got a very good corruption, the +1 power charge, and it's got like a top tier enchant, right? So you've got the 3 layers to it. And then you've got this one here where it's got a good enchant, but it's also got the Shaper and the Elder. Now, people have asked before about the Gilded fossils, or about things like Shaper and Elder influence on unique items, stuff like that. Why do people put those there? I see a lot of people postulate that it is about just the optics or the image of it. It looks cool. While that is true, and that's certainly an element of it, just look at, relics or whatever. People like things that look shiny and they look different. That does add value by itself. But there's actually a functional use for these. And it is somewhat, abstract, not abstract, but it's a small use case, but it nonetheless is objectively better if you are to present with it. And that is for the Eternity Shroud. So we see this item here, and it's gained 3 to 5% of elemental damage as extra chaos damage per Shaper item equipped, right? So if you can put all of your, there are what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 items that are potential that you could do that with. So you can add upwards of 50% elemental added as extra chaos. So that's the reason why you want Shaper on there. And then there's also a replica version, as you can see here, which is 3 to 5% of physical damage added as extra chaos per Elder item equipped. So by having Shaper and Elder, it allows you to cover both bases. There are other things that have impacts on it too. The amount of corrupted items, Shaper items, like there's the rings that if the other ring is Elder or Shaper, whatever it is. But it's just one of those ways to separate yourself kind of from the crowd with an item like this. People do like the visual by itself. For a lot of people, it's cool enough, right? Just looking at the Heat Shiver between these two. If I'm not to mouse over and you were told to pick one, probably pick that one. One of the things to consider too, and I'm going to touch on this point more in deeper depth with the subsequent video I'll make about my thoughts with the league. Again, I'm just kind of trying to compile those and focus on different areas, so it's not a scattered mess of me, talking about things for 2 hours. But one of the things you want to consider if you are in the same market as I am and trying to buy certain items that are going legacy, either for collection's sake or because you want to make some money off of them, do consider the fact that the market tends to have knee-jerk reactions on these things. And so what emerges is a speculative market and not a market trading on fundamentals. And the difference between the two being that a lot of the price hike that happens very quickly when these announcements are made is people trading in future values or future expected values on an item. They're not trading on demand and supply, right? And those would be the more organic measures to dictate price. Now, the farther you go into the future, that's where you're going to see supply and demand. But right off the bat, right? There's just like 100 people who are buying and selling these back and forth. People who are actively trading them to one another. Again, it's speculation on future value. It's not necessarily on the basis of how many people are going to actually functionally need these. And in a lot of cases, that speculative value can actually be a lot higher of a peak than what you're going to actually see in the long run, and certainly when you consider the time value of your currency. So if you are going to go down the route that I'm doing here, or in the subsequent video where I talk about those different categories, do keep that in mind. While holding on to something like this, where it has 3 layers that make it special, right? So the fact that it's the legacy helmet, the really good corruption, and like a top tier corruption, and an enchant, right? This operates outside of that because that is unique enough that the market for those will definitely exceed the supply of these in the long run because it is so specific. But again, I'm just talking more so about like regular heat shivers or regular ashes, things like that that are being nerfed. So with that being said, you can see here I have set up 4 leather helms. The reason why, or sorry, leather helms, leather hoods. Leather hood, if we take a look here, the only potential unique it can turn into is a heat shiver. Now you see Frostferno here. It also shows up. Frostferno is a it doesn't exist anymore. It came from Navali Prophecy. It was a Prophecy unique, but it's not in the game anymore. Which means that Heat Shiver is the only unique it can turn into. This also works with a Mythic Orb. If you don't want to chance Scour, you can also just Corrupt and try it that way. In fact, you could get to this exact same process I am right here, corrupt them, and then just try to Mythic it. But a Mythic is not guaranteed. If you actually, I'm not sure if many of you are aware of this website. I saw this actually posted about this week, and it's got some great information on it. It's called PoEladder.com, and it tells you the exact odds on Ancient Orbs and on Mythic Orbs. But for me, the reason why I wanted to mostly use it is to check out the tier. So Chance Orbs and Mythic Orbs, the propensity with which they will have to turn into the unique item you are searching out, is based on the tier of the drop, right? So tier 1 being the rarest, and tier 5 being the least rare, right? So if we scroll back here, we can see the tiers are all sorted as such, with a total of how many helmets does it look like there are here? 61 total helmets. So Heat Shiver being a tier 3 means it's of average rarity, so it's not super common, but it's not uncommon. And we can see using Ancient Orbs, it would have taken 219 Ancient Orbs. And then we can type, I don't know actually how to navigate it naturally on the site, but if you switch it to Mythic, we can go to Helmet, and it is a leather hood. And Heat Shiver, we can see it takes 13 Mythic Orbs on average. So you could do this, just get leather hood bases, corrupt them all. You could even double corrupt them if you want to try and get like power charge or whatever. But again, I wouldn't bother doing that because, like a 7.8% chance to turn with when you already have that helmet enchant. That's kind of a big risk. However, you could just use a Vol Orb on these and then just YOLO Mythic it anyways. That's a good way to get that. We're going to try and make clean ones because we've got the double corruption, or sorry, we've got the double influence on them here. And so I thought that might be kind of an entertaining video. It's been a while since I've done any kind of chance spamming, but it's also an interesting way to make some money. And again, having these with the double influence not only functionally makes them like it's objectively better to have the double influence on the basis that it does potentially allow for you to use Eternity Shroud, but it also looks cooler and it does something to separate from what is sure to be a somewhat saturated market. So given the fact that they're tier 3, again, it's been a while since I've chanced uniques. I would anticipate it probably takes a couple hundred for each one. Hopefully we get a little bit lucky here so the video doesn't last forever. But leading into that, I'll just explain quickly how I got these. Some of them, I changed my loot filter to drop, to show these specifically, the leather hood. So I got a couple of them from there. You can also go to your vendors in each one of the acts and just type leather hood into the rejects bar or the search bar, and then go to the guy that sells armor and whatever in each act and see if they have them available. The minimum item level for a leather hood is 20, and you can get them that way, or you just buy them off of trade. Now, with respect to item level, it actually does matter for 2 reasons. The first one is that if you want to put double influence on them, it requires item level 65 to be influenced. And also on the low end, you can actually change the item level to dictate what's possible from corrupted mods. So if we take a look here, these are the potential Vol implicits or corrupted implicits you can get using either a Vol Orb or a double corruption. And you can see that they have item levels associated with them. And so there are certain ones that item level 1 are available. And then the highest item level requirement is item level 60, which is for a power charge. So if you want a power charge, I would just go for 65 so you have both options. But if you don't care about the double influence, and you want to try to restrict the potential outcomes, you'll see here that there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's only 8 mods that have item level 1, right? And so if you could get and then the next item level zone is 20. As I mentioned, it requires item level 20 as a minimum on leather hoods. One way around this would be to recombinate a leather hood with a low level item level any other helmet once you get to standard, and that'll the way that recombinators work is it takes the 2 item levels of the 2 items, adds them together, divides them by 2, and adds 2. So if you got a leather hood that was item level 20 and like a level 2 like helmet that just drops on the whatever the beach is at the beginning, that would be 22, right? Yeah, them together is 22, divided by 2 is 11, and then it'll add 2, which would make it item level 13. So that's a way that you can get it below item level 20. But even if you did item level 20, instead of having 23 different options, it would be 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So you cut out 8 options, right? So instead of being a 1 in 23, it would be a 1 in 15. And if you're double corrupting, 1 in 7.5. Right, so that it does substantially improve the odds, in particular if you can find one that is below there, and that's a reason why you might want it on a lower item level. Of course, you could just buy these as well. I think that we're probably going to end up spending more than the cost of a heat shiver on the market right now, but not with the double influence. And as well, you can see I also put 30 quality here, and just for an extra little bit of flair, we put the Gilded Fossil, since it just it kind of just demonstrate like it's another one of those sort of standout sort of peacocking kind of ways to sell an item, I suppose. But yeah, so that's the way that we got the actual leather hoods. After that, I just used a orb of binding to make it 4 linked and 4 socketed. Then we used a Gilded Fossil to put the item cells for more to vendors, and then we put perfect fossils till we got 30 quality, and then scoured it. What I did after that was made it rare, put on either a Crusader or Redeemer orb, just simply because they're the cheapest. Then you come here, and then you reforge the influence until you get either Shaper or Elder, and then you use an Awakener orb on another helmet. So you can see here I've got some random Shapers, some random Elder helmets, and then obviously if you have Shaper on there, you awaken an Elder onto it. Then you scour it, and you are left with a double influence base. So you and by the way, this doesn't apply just to this helmet. You can do this with a variety of different unique items as well. One thing you can do too is if you want, you can use the what was it called? The omen of fortune, maybe. Anyways, there's an omen that makes it so that 1 chance orb automatically turns into a unique. I would highly recommend saving those for standard and using them on items that have a crucible tree, like an Aegis Aurora or an Emperor's Vigilance. Or a prophecy wand, because that'll go to a those will go to a the steel kite shield will go to Emperor's Vigilance. The what's that one called? Champion kite shield will go to Aegis Aurora, and a prophecy wand will automatically go to a void battery. So you can use any one of those 3, and they don't have any other uniques that correspond with them, similar to this. This is more just sort of a fun pursuit and, kind of a cool sort of keepsake, as well as, it's obviously a very strong helmet. And if we get +1 tornado shot or something like that on these, it could be worth quite a bit. But in any case, it's going to be pretty rare to see some. Right here, you can see a demonstration of what it'll look like at the end. Yeah, with the double influence, and this one's only got 20 quality. It also does not have the Gilded Fossil. As another side note here, Gilded Fossils, I get asked this all the time on YouTube comments, what the reason for these is. Do people just like do they want to vendor them? Is it just for so it looks special or whatever? Is it just like a pro and crafter? There's actually a functional reason, and it's to do with corrupted implicits, right? So these don't actually have a natural implicit, so it doesn't matter. But if you have an item that has a natural implicit, let's find one here. Okay, so 2-tone boots, right? If you put a Gilded Fossil on here, so it would say item sells for more to vendor and fire and lightning res. If you then use a Vol Orb, the Vol Orb is going to replace one of the implicits, right? So and it picks that randomly. So if you have the choice to put the Gilded Fossil ahead of time, and it's an item you might potentially corrupt in the future. Oh, actually, here's a better example. Item sells for more to vendors on a mirror ring, right? This is the best Omni ring in the game. Now, it's very unlikely I'm ever going to use a Vol Orb on this, or you're going to double corrupt it. However, it's objectively better as a result of the fact that, because of the fact that it has the potential for that to happen in the future. Who knows, when maybe they add some new crafted mod that may make something better. Maybe somebody recombinates one with frenzy charges. Whatever the possible outcome is, there might be a reason why this no longer becomes a suitable mirror item. And the fact that I have item cells for more to vendors And because I can replace that with a Volk Corrupted Implicit, which on a ring could be Hatred Aura Effect or 7%, 7%, which are not mutually exclusive with the 7% from Synthesis, by the way. So you can actually still roll int percent on there, even though it's already there. Because the Corrupted Implicit is a hybrid mod. It's a mixture, so it's a different, it's not tagged the same way. But that's the reason for it. And it wasn't as largely focused on in the past because it's obviously such a large gamble. Because of Hinakora's locks being added to the game, though, you can do that deterministically now. So, for example, on this helmet I made, you can see it's 6T1 double elevated prefixes, whatever, and it's got the power charge on it too, right? And that was done with Hinakora's locks, and the same thing with gloves. We've got the double frenzy charge, same thing. Now you'll notice that both of these ones have double corruption, and so the Gilded Fossil makes no bearing, but every time I hovered with a lock, right, we were standing right beside the double corruption thing, and we would hover with a ball orb and then hover with the locus of corruption. And we just chose the double corruption because it gave us the charge first in both cases, and of course we're going to pick the charge. But in the situation with, this doesn't actually have a base implicit, so it didn't matter there. But with the Blizzard Crown, it does have a strong implicit on itself. And so if I use the Vol Orb and the Power Charge replace the Gilded Fossil, we could have had both of them. So that's the reason why that's put there. Yes, someone in chat pointing out that it doesn't work with double corruptions anymore. I'm obviously very aware of that. But yes, it will still work with Vol Orbs. And since double corruptions don't matter anyways, to the point I'm making, the point is erroneous because a Gilded Fossil would never matter with double corruptions since there would be two implicits. Actually, that's not true. It could work with a synthesis item. Correction. But yes, that's the reason why that's there. But for this helmet's sake, since there is no base implicit, it is purely for peacocking or just to make it look kind of different and separate it from the other ones. So with that being said, we're now going to try and chance and scour one. So hopefully this doesn't take forever because I think it would just be like a fun way to end this video. For those of you who are here for pure informative sake, or just to maybe learn or check in on what I'm doing, this is the end of the informative content for this YouTube video. The rest of it will just be me going through this process, and hopefully it will not take too long. You might want to, I think that there's an option to speed things up on YouTube. You might want to go through the rest of this at double speed plus, but we'll see how it goes. The last time I did something like this en masse was when they introduced the Holy Chainmail, which is the base for Vol's Protector. When they first, what's it called again? Emperor something? Or Emperor of Purity, I think maybe is the name of the card. Anyway, the divination card that that gives you I think it's item level 50 or 55, 6-linked Holy Chainmail. That was so sweet because first of all, it was too low of an item level to actually be used as a real item. So a lot of people didn't put much value to it when it first came out, right? Because it wasn't like, you had the 6-link cards that gave you like an item, a 6-link influence item or a 6-link item level 100. I can't remember the names of those cards, but it was largely ignored when that card came out initially. But this is also back, I'm talking years ago, by the way. This was back when the meta largely was like discharge in a variety of cast on versions, so trigger versions. That could have been Cosprees, it could have been Mjolnir, and it also could have been Fakener, which used a rare Vegan dagger. So the non-specificity is because there were those multiple iterations of it. But that was very popular at the time, and so the 6-link Vol's Protector was a very, very sought-after item, especially at the beginning of leagues. And so getting that card and chance scouring, I buy the card set, like I get a full set. So getting the 6-link Holy Chainmail, I remember those costing like, 40, 50 chaos. And then it was like, I think it was like 250 chance scours on average. And early on in the leagues, it was, you could get that for maybe a divine and a half, or, well, it was exalts at the time, an exalt and a half. And then you could sell the chests, depending on the colors, for 4 to 7 exalts at the time, right? And I remember there were periods where I would make 20 or 30 of these in a day. I think one league I made 2.5 mirrors by like the second day of the league, just selling those over and over. Oh, that brings up a reasonable point. Obviously, you don't have to just do this for what I'm doing right now. This is mostly for fun, what I'm doing at the moment, and just kind of a cool keepsake to have for, pretty iconic item, one that's in of itself is very powerful. It's obviously used for most tie-in tornado shot builds and some other ones. Um, but if you're ever going to do any kind of chance scouring, this is less relevant now since white sockets are a huge thing. But if for some reason you, uh, you know, don't want to get white sockets or don't want to pay for white sockets, if you ever roll reduced attribute requirements, right, when it's rare like this, the lower the attribute requirements are in an item, the less likely it is to roll certain roll certain colors, right? So the higher the dex requirement is on an item, for example, the more likely it is to roll green sockets. The higher the int requirement, the more likely it is to roll blue sockets, and the higher the strength requirement of an item, the more likely it is to roll red sockets. And so if you get reduced attribute requirements while it's rare, or while it's magic or rare, before you make it into a unique, for example, if you're doing this or any other kind of crafting for that sake, this would be mostly be on a personal level because most real high-end crafting is going to have all white sockets, which is in particular easy this league because of and cheap because of the omen that does it. But for future leagues, that might not always be the case. And there's a lot of items that are not valuable enough that you want to put. You might not want to spend 12,500 wild life force and a sacred fossil just to put on one socket, right? And it does it at random too. So sometimes, even on a 4 link, it might take 10 tries plus sort of thing. That can cost like 40 divines or whatever. So for the vast majority of crafts and items in the game, putting that extra socket is on there. Now, of course, you can always Varici it too, but that's always a toss up. You never know, right? You can get lucky and get the 4 link, or you could even the 4 white. Or you can just even buy an item that's 4 white to begin with, although it's reasonably difficult to find appropriate item level ones that are 4 white, but there are mobs that drop them. But nonetheless, yeah, it's something to consider, just an additional layer to be able to tailor your items well, especially at league starts, actually, where you're obviously not going to have access to level 4 Varicis at on demand, and also where your currency is rather limited, and so sockets can actually be getting the correct color sockets can be a pretty important thing. It's not a terrible idea, especially if you're self-crafting, of course, to consider getting those colors with the through the means I just mentioned. It's also, another point too. If you do have the influence on here, now this is a really bad base, so it's in particular I'm not concerned with it. As well as I mentioned, this is not really for profitability's sake. It's more for kind of a cool collectible item kind of sake. But with the influenced, like when you put on Shaper Elder or any other, you don't have to do Shaper Elder. It makes the most sense of influence mods to put on because of Eternity Shroud, as I mentioned. But you could put Hunter, or some people, if you're just doing it purely for like the optics sake to make it look cool. Hunter's got a pretty cool looking background color. If you're doing those ones, you might actually want to check out what your rolls are when you use Chance Orbs, right? Depending on the item level of the helmet you're doing them on, of course. It's got to be at least 65 to even have an influence on them, but especially with Shaper and Elder, you can actually get some pretty cool outcomes because Shaper and Elder, by virtue of their influence, they cover a lot more than, if you ever go look on any influence item, Shaper and Elder are always going to have a lot more options than any Warlord, Redeemer, Hunter, or what's the one I'm missing? Crusader, because they're kind of a hybrid of those. And also, they're not conquerors, right? They don't come from conqueror maps. Shaper and Elder are their own thing, so they tend to have the mods of all those other ones. But as a result of that, circling around to my point, because they have so many options, you can actually get some pretty solid outcomes from those, again, depending on the helmet base and item level. I probably should have done a prediction on this with the folks watching along on Twitch. Sorry for the YouTube folks. I know I don't address Twitch that often when I'm recording these videos, but if you ever see me sort of haphazardly jumping off topic and seemingly answering a question that is not being asked audibly that you can't see. It is not me going insane, although, you know, the jury's still out on that one. It's usually because I'm reading Twitch chat on my other monitor and I get a little distracted by it. I record all of my videos live, unless it's like one of those long form videos that I have slideshows for. Just because those ones obviously, you know, can be a couple hours long, and they usually require several hours of preparation in terms of me writing the videos and prepping any things I need to show and stuff like that. So I don't want to make people watch me stream for like writing a slideshow for 3 hours. But aside from that, everything else I do live. So, ooh, okay, wait, 3 divine. Sorry, that's a large enough sale that I'll stop for that. I know people have mentioned before that some, like, yeah, I've seen comments, you know, when I get the notifications on YouTube of some people being like, man, like, guy goes off topic all the time, just fucking random ass. No, I recognize I do occasionally do that, but the majority of the time it's actually me replying to something that somebody's saying live. So I'll try and make that more obvious though by addressing Twitch chat as Twitch chat prior to kind of scaling off there. Again, as I mentioned at the start of this, so hopefully nobody feels misled who's watching this on YouTube. I don't know how many. It is tier 3, so it shouldn't take too many. This could take 10 minutes, 5 minutes. It could take like an hour. Hopefully we get there sooner rather than later. Let's stop here quickly, make a little sale. And what did the other guy want? He wanted essences. Which ones? Misery. And they're complimenting the ring. Look at that, boys. Money well spent. I bought the 32, 25, 32, 27. I bought the, what's it called? The display cabinet. And there's no reason to buy the display cabinet unless you're trying to flex on the people who come trade to you. So I put my 5 charge ring in there, and today I've been Today I've been complimented on it like 5 times. And really, what's the point of playing PoE if you're not getting compliments for your cool items? Global chat spamming every cool corruption you hit, gang. I know sometimes people adequately, like correctly and accurately point out. Oops, shit. God damn it. Why do they put visit hideout right below the trade button? That always drives me. I can't tell you how many times I do that. Some people in Twitch chat have made fun of me before when I when I hit a cool item or a cool corruption, something like this, and I immediately go to Global 1 and I link it in chat. And they're like, I can tell that you're an OG player or whatever, which I always laugh at because like back in the day there weren't as many, you know, like there were no forums for communication, right? People didn't have you know, maybe as many friends or Twitch or item showcases or whatever the thing was. People didn't have as many guilds or Discord servers didn't emerge as much and yada yada. So like one of the cool ways or one of the only ways that you could you know, if you weren't a streamer, kind of collectively sharing your successes was to link your items in global. And back then, global channels were very commonly used because people would, you know, they'd be looking for like Gorge rotations, which Gorge was a map that used to exist. That was the most efficient map the game has ever seen, in my opinion. It was literally just if you can imagine, I actually think Canyon is the updated version of it. But if you can imagine Canyon, but it was like about as wide as like, what's a good, like this distance, like between my guild stash here and like the hoarder crafting station, it was like maybe a little bit wider. Guild stash and like the end of this, yeah, it's probably closer. Guild stash and the end of my hideout, that was how wide it was, and it was just a straight line that went the whole way through. And it was called Gorge, and I think it was a level 76 map if I remember correctly. What's that? That's tier 10 or something. But I can't actually remember the tier of it. This is before you could get multiple, like maps were assigned a tier, and you couldn't change them. But yeah, back then you couldn't sustain maps by yourself, especially the higher tier maps, right? You could sustain like white maps, maybe even yellow maps if you like chiseled and scoured and alphed them and stuff. But high like tier like red maps, they wouldn't. You didn't have self sustain, and back then as well. You know, you didn't have an atlas, you didn't have scarabs. What else didn't exist? Oh yeah, you didn't have sextants. or any of that stuff, right? So maps were like very bare bones. It was like you could chisel it, you could alk it, chaos orbit if you really wanted to. I suppose if you really, really wanted to, you could exalt it. But exalts were, what our divines are today, so that's not like people are realistically going to do that. And then when they had the corruption of the veil or whatever that event was called, when they added vol orbs, you could vol the maps as well. But those were the only ways you could really impact map drops. I suppose you had group quantity as well. But even with that, it was almost impossible to individually sustain maps. So, by the way, sorry, as a quick tangent, I know I'm going off track here for anyone on YouTube. It's just because I don't want to sit here silently chant scouring these things and have you guys just hearing the sound of me clicking. So the story hour has some purpose to it. But yeah, no, back then it was impossible to sustain maps, and so everyone would use global channels to find groups. And this is actually why I started playing Discharge, by the way, too, which I will get to in a moment. Oh, there we go. Reduce attribute requirements. What I was talking about earlier. If you get this mod on here, it's easier to change the colors, especially if the base that you're using has a high attribute requirement. But I digress. Yes, since it was impossible to sustain map drops, people would use global channels for finding groups, right? So people would say, like, looking for more gorge rotation, bring your own map. Also, back in the day, what we now have with like Einhar and all those guys, the masters at the time were the people that you see in Katarina's hideout. So like Vagan and Elrion and all those guys. Those were your masters, and they had daily missions similar to World of Warcraft, where you could do a daily master mission like once a day, and those master missions would give you like reputation and rank, and like once you got to a certain level with them, that's when you would be able to unlock meta mods. And obviously back then, meta mods were like one of the only crafting forms that existed. What did this guy want again? Yeah. Since you only had like exalts and exalts, meta mods, scours, chants, alts, transmutes, augments, vols, GCP. There were like 12 currency items. It wasn't like today where there's like 200 currency items. And so, yeah, getting meta mods is really important. But the only way to even get access to those crafting mods was to do like 3 weeks of daily fucking missions. Even more than that. Might even be more than 3 weeks if you were to do it by yourself. However, you could group up with people and you could get the experience from their vendor or from their missions if you did them in a group. So people would also try to look for those in global channels. And this is how like Global 820 emerged originally, was because of all of this requirement, right? So that's why if any of you use Global 820, this was the reason why channels like that emerged, was to try and share those master missions, to find map drops, whatever, to share achievements, because it was much, much harder to do them individually. But this brings me back to my other point. Because of this, and because people were so commonly in these channels for actual reasons that pertain to, like functional gameplay usage, not like today. Like when you go to global, it's usually just people like asking for advice or tips. Like global 1, at least, it's usually newer players. Is this a good item to pick, guys? Which just discussing the game. Back then, it was similar. I mean, 820's kind of fallen off a little bit, but it was. It was used much more like a channel like that, where people were going in there specifically with, either looking for map rotations or for master rotations or whatever. And so, for the people that played back then, if you found a really cool item and you didn't have a stream or something or a guild that you could link it in and get people being like, "Ooh, that's so sick! I wish I had that." That little like player envy that we all. I don't care what any of you on YouTube or Twitch say. Everyone likes that feeling when you get a sick item. People are like, "What the fuck? That's sick." That's like half the fun in these games, right? Is having something cool that other people want to have. But yeah, people used to, every time someone would get something sick, you'd see them link it in one of those global channels, and that was actually another reason why channels like 820 emerged, because of they didn't want to. They wanted all of the chatters to be focused on a single task and not somebody linking a cool item and then other people asking how they made that or whatever. I'm just going on those side tangents. But also I mentioned that this is taking a lot more chance than I thought it would, by the way. another thing I had mentioned was that that was how I started playing Discharge. So this is actually going back to Gorge. And again, I realize these stories are kind of all over the place, but it is just, to save you from the silence. Going back to the Gorge I was mentioning, though, which was that hyper-efficient map people used to do map rotations for in those global channels. The reason why I was initially intrigued by Discharge was because you would always see in these global channels when I first, started the game, and you'd see it actually for years after that until they changed the operating system or whatever or not operating system, but until GGG like improved the game. When I first started playing, it would take like 3 minutes to load the game. Now it was also partially because of my computer because I didn't have an SSD at the time, which was basically a mandatory back then before they optimized the game somewhat. But yeah, it would take like 3 minutes to load. Like you'd open the game and it would sit there like preloading the game for like, I'm not even joking, like 3 or 4 minutes if you didn't have an SSD. This is back in like 2013, 2014. And so one of the things it also had issues with, though, was, server performance when there was, too many particles or when there was too much like MTX or like playing in a group, it could get pretty overboard pretty quickly. Now, Discharge in oh, there we go! Yeah! Okay. Let's get a little damn boy in there.
Damn, boy. Damn, boy, he's thick. Boy, that's a thick-ass boy.
Thick boy crafting crew. All right. I'll wrap up my story for those of you on YouTube who are still watching and you sickos that watch the entire sesh. Wrapping up the story. Yeah, the game was poorly optimized and you would be in these global channels and all you would see is people spamming, looking for more Gorge rotation. No, and then in caps lock, no Discharge allowed. Because Discharge back in the day would be used by Mjolnir, but Mjolnir did not have an internal cooldown, neither did Discharge, and there was no when a discharge would happen, it would change color based on the max charge. So if you used Molten Strike, Multi-Strike, at faster attacks, GMP, LMP, Fortify, every single one of the Molten Strike balls that went off, you would have because you would use back then that version of Discharge used not Divine Shield, it used Resolute Technique. So every Molten Strike thing would hit. There was no accuracy concern, and every single one of those little fireballs would trigger a Discharge, and there was no internal cooldown. And so Discharge, if you were attacking like with multi-strike faster attacks, you'd be attacking like let's say 12 times a second, and you'd be shooting off like 9 fireballs. So that's like 108 hits per second, and each one of those hits would trigger Discharge, which meant that you were discharging 108 times a second, and each one of those discharges would shoot up because you didn't have frenzy charges in it back then because you're using Vol's devotion, so it would be power charge or endurance charge. But you get this giant red flame and then a giant blue flame, and because it was happening 108 times a second, it would be like, and it would crash everybody. It would crash everybody. So you'd have these Gorge rotations that people are like desperately trying to get into so they can get some experience. So that the maps, because they couldn't get their own map drops, and they would get in there, and then people like they'd say no discharge, and sometimes people used to troll them, and they'd be like, yeah, I'm playing whatever, and they would have different gear sets on, and then once they got on the map, they would switch into their discharge gear, which you could very clearly tell because Mjolnir has a 3D art, and often they would have like shabs on, and then Sappho's frame, and either like Devotos or. Anyways, the image of like a Rainbow New character was like you could very clearly see the character art for it. So like people would change their gear over to that, and then they would start going, and you would just see people being like the sound you make, like the PoE equivalent of like a driving under a tunnel in real life, and you would just see like has left the party, and then the person who was the discharge player would get to just solo the fucking Gorge and keep all the map drops. But yeah, because of that, it was like I distinctly remember in all caps lock back in the day looking for more Gorge, no discharge, and because the map was so narrow, you couldn't like avoid it, right? It wasn't like you could off screen or like hang back. It was like if you wanted to be in range of the kill, you had to be standing right beside it, and yeah, that was actually what drew me to discharge originally. That there was such a strong build that was so good that it wasn't allowed to be in parties because it was so strong that it would fucking crash everybody else. I just thought that was a crazy concept to my naive PoE, my naive and new to PoE brain back at the time. So yeah, anyways, that was it was only ever the party members. It was never the discharge player themselves. I mean, sometimes it would happen, but proportionally, it was almost always them. Sorry, that was me answering Twitch for the YouTube folks. Anyways, guys, that was there you go. So we hit the hit shover. I'm going to finish these ones up, but for the sake of the video, there we go. We've got the double influence with the Gilded fossil and the 30 quality. Nice little unique looking heat shiver, and it will soon be legacy. So there's a one to add to the collection. I don't know. We'll end up running some labs with Gift to the Goddess and try to get a different enchant on there. Obviously, Righteous Fire AoE is not particularly useful. So there's the video, and again, look forward to, or sorry, not look forward, but you know, look out for the video I have covering the rest of the changes. I've got the patch notes up here. I've actually expressed a lot of what I wanted to talk about on Twitch already. So for those of you who really want to know what I'm doing for currency, my perspective on certain things and whatever, if you want, I made my VODs public on Twitch, so you can go back and look through those at the beginning of my first stream today. And I did cover a lot of that already. But for those of you, like I know most of you aren't that hyper vigilant, so I will have something coming out probably either tonight or tomorrow about that as well. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you found this interesting. And for those of you who you know, go down this road or try anything yourself in that vein, good luck and happy hunting, and I'll see you soon. Peace.